Yeah, I saw this little bit of news and it made me wince. But if there's one thing Lando Norris has learnt from Max Verstappen, is to not care what other people think or show at you. But it still sent Racing Bull's PR department into panic stations after months of relative calm post-Horner. You gotta admit, it's been quite stable over there for those two teams. Planet F1 reporting that fan footage from the Brazilian Grand Prix showed a Racing Bulls employee giving Norris a bit of a thumbs down. And I know what you're going to be saying, oh come on Law, you think that was absolutely egregious, do you? No, I think it raises a bigger question. F1 has come a long way in terms of having a broad reach, and something as small as that triggering this amount of online backlash? Yeesh. I would like to believe VCAR, because these days the team seems quite on the level. Lauren Mecky's leaving it in good hands with Andy Permain. I don't think they are out to cause trouble as a collective. And you might personally think that this is all a bit of a nothing burger, that it's just part and parcel of being at the top of Formula One, that not everybody has to or will like you. Yeah, I absolutely hear you, and I do think that this is a bit of a mountain out of a molehill. That a thumbs down? Really? I understand it is somewhat disrespectful, but it could easily be a lot worse. A thumbs down is relatively tame. Back in the day, we saw drivers punching each other right there on the track. It got very, very aggressive, and I'm really thankful that these days we don't see such displays. So I personally believe throwing a thumbs down isn't the worst thing imaginable. Unless you live in ancient Rome, of course. Oh, but Lando, he's absolutely seizuring the moment right now. But it does bring up a question in of itself. Why has Lando Norris become so polarizing, whilst Max Verstappen, once the sport's chief villain, is now becoming more broadly respected? Especially when you take him around one of the motor racing havens of the world, that being, of course, Italy. Heck, I was there where Verstappen took pole at Silverstone. I did not hear a single boo. There was actually a decent amount of applause. We all know about Verstappen being cheered on the podium when he won around Imola, he won at Monza. There was even people chanting his famous do-do-do-do song right back at him. There was that amount of respect. Norris, who was also on the podium for Monza, was booed as he arrived on the dais. Then he got booed at Mexico City where he took the win there, and then he got booed again around Interlagos despite winning both races rather tidily. Mexico by 30 seconds, that's undoubtedly skillful, and then by 10 seconds as everyone else behind him were tripping over each other. And this to me makes it really, really weird. It's because you would think by winning races cleanly and showing your skill right there with absolutely no doubt whatsoever, I don't need the phone to tell you that Lando at Mexico and Brazil was clearly the more planted driver. But apparently that is not good enough for Norris. But then I have to think maybe this is all part of the cycle of heroes and villains within Formula One, that maybe we are seeing in 2025 the passing of the torch as to who is Formula One's main villain. Because it's no longer Max Verstappen I'm seeing. I think Lando Norris is taking up the mantle. So maybe the boos are ritual, you might be thinking? Or maybe they might be more locally charged, and then we're just seeing it being broadcast around the world to hundreds of millions of people, and it might be then feeding into many other narratives as to why Lando is quite divisive. And I think maybe Norris, since he is leading the championship for the first time since the beginning of the season when everything is so up in the air, now it's a little bit more clear, he is figuring out that once you inherit that lead, you inherit the noise that comes with it. Something that Oscar Piastri has had to suffer through for 15 races this year. And now that he's fallen back behind Norris, there are those out there pondering whether or not his decline is one of the biggest bottle jobs in Formula One history. A little harsh for the guy who's only into his third season of F1, don't you think? But as it stands, Norris is looking likely to win his first world title, and by a margin which, as of recording, is just 1 point shy away of the 25 that Martin Brundle would famously put as having a DNF in his pocket. That is a hugely important psychological cushion if the worst were to happen. It's something that gave Oscar a crumb of comfort around Baku, which he admits is one of the worst weekends he ever had in racing. That, yeah, it was really bad, but yeah, at least I got over 25 points. I'm still leading the championship. And even though Lando has actually, and undoubtedly, found a vein of performance, the visitations to the podium are not being that well received in the year of our Bernie Collins 2025. And then you might be wondering, why are you caring about this law? Surely you would be loving the fact that people don't like Lando because Oscar Piastri is your boy. Yeah, you're right. Oscar Piastri is one of my boys. I've now got about 3 of them and a man in Carlos Sainz to pin my hopes toward. But I certainly don't want to see Lando Norris getting all of the scorn aimed toward him when he's actually managed to turn things around after a dreadful start to 2025. You gotta give him credit where it's due. But admittedly, I don't particularly enjoy it when the Australian is given his fair share of blowback, especially around the burger campaign that he had with Grilled in Australia, then walking back its podium discount promotion for the fact that Oscar's, well, not had one in several races, them even joking about it. In fact, not since Monza has he been on the podium. Seriously, that circuit has been more trouble than it's worth for McLaren with those two knocking around, hasn't it? I'm not talking about this year, I'm not talking about even the year before that, I'm talking about the year before that. It all started in their first season together, 2023. They nearly collided at turn 1, and they both got a bollocking from Andrea Stella, and I certainly don't think it's going to be the last time those two come to blows with one another at that famous track. But safe to say, Lando hasn't had many drama-free weekends this season, hasn't he? And I think that's been stewing for years now, since his second season actually. And that stew is now packed with croutons of less than ideal optics. In fact, it's not all that dissimilar to what Liam Lawson has been dealing with since he returned to active duty after replacing Daniel Ricciardo last year, with him making comments about other drivers and them rubbing up those drivers and fans the wrong way. He experienced what Norris has been experiencing at a much faster lick. It's been almost causing whiplash for me. Because no matter how you phrase it, it's been a really bumpy ride in terms of public perception for Lando in his nearly 150 races within Formula 1, him about to become the longest-serving McLaren driver of all time. And this year has been especially bouncy, now he finds himself at the top of the food chain. Him suffering through the 15-race deficit toward his lesser-experienced teammates, to then reacquiring the title lead and then promptly adding to it in quick fashion. The booing we've seen in the last 2 consecutive races, then that Racing Bulls video coming out poured petrol all over it and sparked this particular video. All that plus papaya rules, which Norris then claimed never existed, couple that with all of the comments that Lando has made about other drivers in the past when times were not so good and they didn't get as much attention back then as they may be making now with a second appearance, it's all pointing towards a champion-elect who is casting a very controversial light on Formula 1. It may explain why he is not receiving universal acclaim for what he's actually able to do, in that he is able to lead the title, pull away from Piastri, and make some headway toward Max Verstappen and righting the wrongs of what happened around Brazil last year when his campaign then completely flopped. But yeah, about all of that booing, I really do think some of the local sentiments towards the driver might have skewed the actual affectations. Yeah, we all talk about Monza being a catalyst as to why Lando may not be unpopular with many Formula 1 fans, but step back a bit and you might start to see a little bit more clearly, because Norris has quite a bit of history with the local hero, Sergio Perez, who by the way is coming back next year, meaning that the Mexican crowds are fired up for his return. I can easily imagine that many Mexican fans will not forget the stuff that Norris has said about their guy over the years, much like how I understand that Checo fans will not forget the things that I said back in 2023 about Sergio Perez when I was not quite as experienced as being an F1 content creator. And I've also learned from it that you just gotta roll with the mistakes you made in the past and then just do better, learn from it. And whilst I think Lando is trying to calm that particular thing down, the stuff he said in the past is still making me just go, ugh, yeesh, mate. No wonder Checo fans don't exactly like you. There was one time he jested about Checo getting driver of the day. Then he made a comment that Checo crashes into a lot of people and Red Bull would have taken the constructors with 2 Verstappens, to name but just a few instances of Perez bashing. Yeah, that's going to stick in the minds of the legions of homegrown supporters. And then that local sentiment gets beamed around the planet, and it may feed into other fandoms that may have a little bit of a gripe towards Lando Norris, and it just fuels the fire. It fuels confirmation bias saying, yeah, Lando, no likey. It's only going to instill yet more debate as to, is Norris a deserving world champion? I still keep telling you, I predicted Lando would win the title this year, and right now, he is 24 points ahead. He is very much making hay while the sun shines and having this uptick in pace, and whilst Oscar Piastri has improved from his dip in 2024, he has not quite improved enough, or at least on the surface. But nevertheless, it has provided fuel for many journalists and fans who will go back to Monza. McLaren asking Piastri to hand second place back to Norris after he lost out through a slow stop of McLaren's own doing. Piastri then grumbled on the radio that a slow stop is just part of racing, something which he believed to be outside the scope of papaya rules, but well, I guess not. But he did the swap anyway. And now he's gone on to admit on F1's Beyond the Grid podcast that Monza had been in his head around the time of Baku, which, as we saw, unravelled with 2 visits to the barriers. I am not saying one bit that what Oscar said proves hand over my heart that there is institutional bias at play. I really don't think that. I think there is a trust pact between McLaren and Piastri. They want it to work out, but can it actually work out? I'm not so sure. I'll save that for another video, so if you want to see it, do drop a like and maybe subscribe for when that drops, because this entire McLaren story, it's fascinating, it's tragic, it's also really comprehensive and unnecessarily complicated, don't you think? It also makes the narrative around Lando that little bit more sticky, because it links a visible team order to an actual wobble in Oscar's form, which has resulted in him never visiting the podium again after that dreaded weekend, whilst Lando has only been off the podium 1 time, funnily enough around Baku. So for those booing Lando just because of Monza, what Oscar said is just going to make that booing even louder, no matter how much Oscar's saying, yeah, there were other things too, like I was nursing an engine problem, I was already a bit rattled in FP1, I wasn't really feeling it. There were other qualifiers that Piastri said, but that headline did stick. And then there's the longer arc of Norris and McLaren too. An arc which I personally think is not just aging like milk, I think it's aging like raw chicken. And all the stuff that Zach Brown has said about Lando Norris in the past, about him being at the heart of McLaren and a franchise driver, it was all rather cute going as recently as 2023, when you could easily say, yeah, Lando is the team leader. He deserves to be right at the heart of that particular team. He's been there through thick and thin, even though he was getting many flirtations from multiple teams, including Red Bull. All of this back around the time when he absolutely smashed Daniel Ricciardo, and he must have felt invincible. However, when you revisit that quote in a live title fight this year with a teammate who has kicked on and shown that he can be quick, it's easy for rival fans to read that as proof that McLaren will always tilt Norris's way no matter what, even when the CEO insists to the world he would rather lose the driver's title than favour one driver unnecessarily. I want to believe that, I really, really do. As much as I think Norris and Piastri would want the same thing. They would not want any caveats or asterisks attached to their first World Championship, because many people still call into question Verstappen's first World Championship. So yeah, I think Lando and Oscar look to that and go like, yeesh, I don't want that. But ultimately, I don't think McLaren can win this war of words. It's simply too far gone. The only way that this can actually die down is by Lando consistently thumping Oscar on the track as well as thumping Verstappen. Then you might be thinking, well, yeah, okay, he came good when he had to. And it would add even more legitimacy to his first world title, at a point where team orders wouldn't really matter or would figure. But I'm not done regarding Lando's track record of, let's say, being a little bit too blunt with his words. Still gotta come back to his track record about being a little bit too blunt with his words, and you know exactly where I'm going. 2020. The most infamous instance of all this was back when he downplayed Lewis Hamilton's win record at a time where he equalled Michael Schumacher's 91 race record, a feat that nobody expected to be bested back in 2006 when Michael first did it. Now, it's important to note that Lando did go on to apologise for the comments, and it was quite the noteworthy walkback, him going as far as saying, I haven't shown the respect I should have to certain people. At the time, given that Lando was very early in his career, you would give him the benefit of the doubt. You'd be saying, yeah, Lando, that was a very silly thing to say, but I'm glad that you actually were sorry and that you will learn from it. But fast forward to right now, and he has continued to say at times rather irritating remarks that would rub fandoms up the wrong way. All of the stuff that he said in 2020 could come across as a bit, you know, half-hearted or disingenuous. Because in 2022, he went on to say that he had no sympathy toward Ricciardo's struggles at that team. Yeah, that could come across as rather cold and really cruel, especially if you're a Ricciardo fan. You'd be thinking that Lando is the devil. But to other fandoms, including Lando's own, they would describe this as, well, he's only being honest because look at what Daniel was doing at McLaren. He was absolutely nowhere, whereas Lando was really ruling the roost. Yeah, okay, I would understand that, and mathematically you are not wrong. But when Lando started off that particular quote as saying, I don't want to be mean, but You were kind of being mean. Look, what I'm trying to say is that fans don't forget. And his current posture to those who may not like him will only just continue to make them like him even less. But then at the same time, for those who do like Lando Norris, they'll be thinking, yeah! Oh yeah, he's got the balls! Because he smiles through the boos. He says he even finds it funny, telling people to do what they want, and he's ignoring the crap. That has aided him regaining a sense of control in this year's title chase, when it looked really likely he was about to lose control of his own team. And Max Verstappen himself has been able to famously tune out all of that criticism, sometimes actually even feeding off of it. Lando Norris is only doing the same thing, and this might stand him in good stead. Verstappen has come out the other side, and now you're hearing more and more instances of people saying, yeah, actually, upon reflection, Max is actually a really good driver. It's the sort of thing that Sebastian Vettel experienced when he moved over to Ferrari, that people started to like him a little bit more and dislike him a little bit less. And then by the time he retired, everyone was saying, no, Seb, please don't go. That being said, for people who expected to come to a race and expect another driver to win, many people thinking that it was Max Verstappen's for the taking, what Lando is demonstrating could easily be described or painted as cocky. And what that VCARB stuff have proved is that any person could be drawn into the firing line of that particular drama. So what you're saying here, Law, is down to the fact that people are booing him because he said something bad about the local man? Yeah, partly, but it still comes right back round again to the perception that not everyone at McLaren is getting the same treatment. Make no mistake, every single driver gets his fair share of criticism. Max has had his fair share, Lewis has had his fair share, Fernando, Sebastian. It's all part and parcel of being at the top. No, the core driver here is competition within a team that undoubtedly has the fastest car over the course of a season. McLaren let their drivers race hard, but occasionally corrected them in public after the fact. Monza's swap gave people a symbol to rally around, which was not nuanced whatsoever. We all saw it. And the result of that particular instance, now just a couple of months later, is that there's been a 50-point plus swing against Piastri, and now suddenly Lando is 24 points ahead of the Australian, where back at Zandvoort, it was looking like this was Piastri's for the taking. What's going on? People want an explanation. And whilst Andrea Stella is trying his best to calm things down and talk rationally and calmly and just repeat the same thing over and over again, that there's nothing wrong with those two drivers, they are representing McLaren perfectly, Zach Brown comes along and then says all of this stuff that gives the conspiracy theories legs. Him going as far as recalling 2007, a year which I think many people who work at McLaren and the collective of fans who were around at the time want to scrub from their memories. So all of that could explain why Lando has such a polarizing aura, but you're probably wondering, is this ever going to go away? Well, Jacques Villeneuve put it simply, that in order to bring this down a couple of notches, Lando has to win the World Championship absolutely by a country mile, by more than all of the team orders combined that were afforded to him in 2025. That would be the cleanest way in trying to restore your standing amongst the wider F1 world. A place where people really like statistics and mathematics, and if it's a situation where it all checks out, and by maybe him wrapping it up in Qatar and not Abu Dhabi. Norris has already moved in that direction, with him now matching Piastri's win tally this year, and it's still mathematically possible he could win 10 races this year if he were to win all 3 remaining outings. However, all of this will start to roar right back up again if Piastri suddenly turns things around and Verstappen then brings it back on song and takes away points from Norris, and we find ourselves in a situation at Abu Dhabi where the gap between Piastri and Norris is right back down to single figures. People will then have the justification to point back at Monza and say that was the race which decided the title, much like how people were hypothetically pointing to Hungary last year. Norris losing out on 7 points, and if it did get really tight, if it did go all the way, and Verstappen only won by, say, 6 or 7 points, all of the Norris fans would have pointed to McLaren and say, don't you see? That race cost Lando the championship. And then we get to the point in the video where I reward you for sticking it out this far, because there is another ingredient in all of this, and this is down to style. How Lando Norris wishes to win this world championship. He most likely does not want to win the world title being seen as a ruthless killer. It might go some way to explain why people were fired up after Austria 2024 and fired up after Singapore when Lando Norris stood his ground, only to then walk it back just a week or two later saying that, oh, you know, I'm sorry about that, or, oh, it wasn't all of that bad, I've understood, I've learned my lesson. And then people will go like, what the hell, Lando? I thought you'd suddenly become a ruthless killer. And it's caused a lot of backlash and a lot of confusion, as in, people can't exactly place Lando in the puzzle of Formula One. It's like he's a square peg in a round hole. Now, don't get me wrong, many love the idea that he's trying to break the mold, whereas others may think it reeks of entitlement. And that tension may not vanish even if he lifts the first place trophy. Much like how Piastri is trying to do so himself with a more stoic and reserved nature, which has also not been received as fondly as he might have thought, because some people describe Piastri as horizontal, as in he's boring, he's dull, he's not charismatic. Sure, he does have his cheeky side, which is why I personally don't agree with the media's dumping of the connections of, oh, he doesn't talk much, therefore he's Kimi Räikkönen, ha 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 ha. If there were to be any comparisons in terms of personality, it would be more like Mika Häkkinen. He too having a cheeky side, but he could easily just put his game face on and go racing with the best. Far more difficult a predicament than, say, if Charles Leclerc or George Russell became world champion. You can easily put those two men in a particular box, whereas with the two McLaren drivers, it's a lot harder to do so. It's either down to their individual paths towards glory, how they wish to win their first world title, or by the way McLaren is handling them, maybe just completely stifling them into the way that they want them to win the world title. It may make people feel uneasy because this, what Lando and Oscar are trying to do, goes against the sport's mythos. You know, the mythos that every single world champion has to be aggressive, they have to be cruel, they have to be vicious, they have to be baring their teeth and going, I'm gonna win the world title and not you! Whereas Lando's going like, no, I want to win this fairly, you know, it's not fun if it's not fair, and then Oscar's over here just saying, But hey, that's just only a hunch in my mind. In any case, the VCARB employee's actions set off yet another firework in the fireworks display surrounding Norris. Let's remember, folks, he may have plenty of experience, but he's still a young man with plenty more years underneath him. He's still got plenty of time to prove himself. Like how Max has weathered through the negative seas and come out the other side a more respected gentleman. That could happen to Lando as well in the fullness of time, so long as Zach Brown doesn't continue to muddy the waters with his own little quips, which then continues to fuel the fire and completely undermines McLaren's own edict, which was established by Ron Dennis, that sure, he had his favourites, he made no bones about liking Mika over David Coulthard, but one thing he prided himself upon was having equal machinery. That, yeah, his heart was biased, but his brain, the mechanical side, the technological side, it had no favourites. Because you'd need both cars to be doing well to win the constructors. Duh. And a trait that I would like you to have is to head on over to this video because I really believe you will like this one. So I'll see you over there.